Welcome to Higher Ed Matters. I'm Josh Bestromowitz, and I'm thrilled to have Dr. Michael Thorp with us this afternoon. He is the Vice President of Enrollment in Clarkson University. Welcome, Mike.
How you doing?
Doing great. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely, Josh. So I've been in enrollment management, I guess, over 33 years now. I started as an admission counselor in Wisconsin years ago, and over the years, I've just found new and more things to love about my work. And like anyone's career, it evolves and grows. And here we are in northern New York, and I'm just enjoying every day that I come to the office.
Awesome. Fantastic. I'm sure, I've been in higher ed for about 15 years, and it has changed drastically alone from my early days, in admissions to now. So I can imagine what you've seen.
Well, it's kind of mind blowing when you think about it. I was talking to colleagues, and of course, I'll date myself now. Back in the day, you know, th- during the summer, we would sit there at our desks and read novels because the class was in after May 1st, and well, we didn't have a computer on our desk, and we didn't have cell phones, so we were just waiting for families to come and tour, and we take them out on tour, and that's what we did, and that's so different than where we are today. And in that process, I can remember things like, oh, I can remember when shrink wrapping the view book was innovative because the students could see what was inside the envelope, right? Okay, so that's another way to date myself. And
No, you're not far off. I remember, my first director of admissions, she had coded to where we were personalizing admit letters. And that was like being able to put somebody's name in the letter was tremendous, right? Like it was huge. So my how things have changed.
yeah, and then the variable paragraph admit letter,
Yeah.
even better. I mean, we were doing that at the last institution where I worked, and does that stuff work? I mean, I don't know that I can honestly tell you. I've looked at data, and unfortunately sometimes you think they're inconclusive. I can remember I had this one dean of admission that I worked for, and he said to me, Mike, you're just like me. You want the answers to be in the data, but sometimes they're just not there, and you just have to make a decision and move on. And he was right.
It's one of the things that totally frustrates me is, when typically it's usually like an interview process that folks say they're data driven. And so much of what we do, yes, the data matters, but so much of us and what we do, like there's still people behind the data. And so I always said, I would much rather be data informed or making data informed decisions than data driven because we can't forget that human aspect of what we do, right?
And you can't escape the fact that there are people making decisions behind that data, and sometimes the data is just not going to reveal the answer. I think you're absolutely right. Data informed is a way more accurate way to describe it.
Sure. So let's talk. I saw your presentation at the National Small Colleges Conference this summer in Charlotte, and I thought your topic was so relevant and kind of like our conversation so far is retention has been talked about for the last 20, 30 years. It's always been a component, but really caught fire within probably the last 10 years or so, maybe even 15. And I thought you had a really interesting perspective in terms of retention, the approach to it. So talk to me a little bit about why is retention so important?
I guess it was maybe 15 years ago when US News changed. They're always changing the US News survey, right? And one of the metrics they used, thankfully, was first year to second year retention rate. And we all sort of snapped to attention when we thought about that. But on the enrollment side, we've always been aware of retention rates because if your yield rate is, well, back in the day, 30%, that means you have to admit three students to get one to enroll. So
Yep.
that's a lot of money when you're thinking about cost per recruited student. And at the end of the day, it's really about the student experience. We spend all of our emotional energy recruiting these students. The last thing we want is for them to come to our school and have a bad experience, right? I mean, so that's really the motivation right there.
Definitely. I would say often, one of the things that would keep me up as a director of admissions was admitting the wrong student,
Mhm.
and allowing them to enroll and allowing them to either not continue their education, which ultimately they've been in a worse position, right? Now that they've racked up probably some student debt, or they even transfer and the experience can't be as transformational as it could have been. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think obviously academically we want to make sure that the right fit, but personality wise and from again the human standpoint, we really want to make sure that it's a good experience for them.
Mm. And we have to be really careful the way we approach this stuff. Again, I'll refer back to the same dean that I mentioned a minute ago. He would always caution me. He said, you want to give this student a chance, but you have to think about what that means for the student. Giving them
Mhm.
a chance when they're taking on a fairly hefty debt, like we shouldn't be admitting students that we don't think can succeed, which means we have to have a very solid understanding of who is successful at our institution. Um, and until we do that, until we have that baseline understanding, all of this stuff is meaningless.
Absolutely. I think that we have to be willing to have hard conversations.
Mhm.
And I used to always kind of refer to it as, if your dream is my institution or your institution, right? If that's the end goal, there are options to get you here. It may not be the direct path that you want to take or that even you want to hear at this point, right? Academically, you may not be prepared. Financially, you may not be prepared. If the goal is to get you here, we can make it happen, but it may not be today.
That's a
And I
good way
think
to think of it. Yeah.
I think that's it's such an important way, and it can be, especially when we have become so numbers driven, right? I've been at most of my institutions that I've been at, enrollment was always a challenge. We were always fighting for each and every student. And it was that hard balance, right? To be able to say, I want to make my numbers, but at the same time, am I making that ethical decision? And what is ultimately the best right of the best option for the student? And that's a tough line to ride.
Right. Absolutely.
So let's talk again a little bit about in terms of like just retention in the funnel and something that you'd kind of mentioned in your presentation was creating this kind of coalition across campus of it's not just admissions or enrollment or even marketing that is ultimately going to get a student and keep a student, but you really have to create this coalition across campus. Can you kind of tell me a little bit more about how you've created that on your campuses?
Yeah, I'm laughing because it's one of the most important things that we do in enrollment management, and yet it's like so many things, very complex. It doesn't come easy. And I'm not going to tell anyone that's listening to this that I'm by any stretch of the imagination an expert. It's just hard because it's all comes down to, personal relationships we have with our colleagues across campus and helping them understand their component piece to this. Here, let me just give you a couple examples.
Sure.
Like, we get the student here and they get a bill, and what goes out from the business office might be something. I've seen this before. We've been referring to the student as Dear Susan um, all year long, and suddenly they get their bill and says Dear Student. Like
Mhm.
that's not very good. And then sometimes the language can be very um, that comes out from other departments. It's not the caring and nurturing language that we've developed over the 30 months recruitment cycle.
Oh
And
yeah.
you read these bills, and it can be kind of cold. Here's a great example. Sometimes the business office will just, and the business office has no control over this. There's a lot of stuff that goes out from Nelnet. So regarding the student's loan. And the pro style on those Nelnet emails is really kind of cold and in some ways harsh.
Mhm.
So one of the things that we've done at a couple of institutions where I've worked is just prepare the student and the parents for that email saying, hey, in a couple of weeks, you're going to get this bill from Nelnet, and here's what it's going to say. We want you to know what it means. Here's what it's going to say. Here's what you need to understand about this. When you have questions, just call us. We'll help you out with it. Just small things like that can make a big difference. Now, a lot of schools, depending on your, the whatever sort of budget size you have, there are a couple of schools that have great financial aid portals that they're providing for students, or enrolling student portals. Maybe you've done it through your slate iteration. but not all of us have that capacity to do that.
Sure,
So
sure.
again, we don't we don't have to have all the budget in the world. Of course, I want it, but exactly. But just think about, the student experience. Ask yourself at every decision point, at every, significant calendar moment throughout the year. What's the student going to get? How are they going to receive this message? How can I make it more user friendly? And again, in talking to our colleagues about this, we need to help them understand, hey, we've been creating this relationship with them for 30 months. And we want to help you transition that relationship from the enrollment office to campus. And here's your piece of this. Let us help you do this for you. We're happy to send out all of your email correspondence through our CRM. So maybe that's something you can do for them. And just explain, like, hey, we'll help you edit these. We'll send it out. And then that way you know who opens it and who doesn't. If we see someone that's not opening their emails from the business office, we can call them and make an intervention. So again, these are all the small steps we can do with our colleagues across campus to help them understand what we do.
Sure. And I think that, that was a very similar situation that I had in my last institution. And it was no fault of the department or even the institution, right? Everybody's trying to do what's best or what they think is best in the interest of the student. But I really utilized Slate. We were implementing it at the time to be able to kind of bring those folks around the same table to kind of pull in because not necessarily an issue that we had in terms of like voice and content. It was the fact that multiple offices were sending multiple emails to the same student in one day. And I was like, y'all, we gotta corral this, right? Like, what is a worse way to say that we don't know the student by everybody getting like tons of emails from similar or different offices across campus. And so I think, like you'd mentioned, utilizing your CRM like Slate or Salesforce, TargetX, to be able to help them at the end of the day, right? We want to be a resource to them to say, we understand 100% how difficult it is to reach students and to know that they're opening our emails or to know that they're answering our phone calls. We have a tool that we can use to say this person hasn't opened any emails in terms of their financial aid or their bill. How can we approach this situation better? And it's better customer service. It's less headaches across the board, and ultimately, we're serving the student better. So I agree. I think utilizing your CRM to be able to support their office is a huge support and a huge. It helps everybody involved.
Absolutely. Now's also a great time to be thinking about future planning because for many of us, we're just now starting to read in decision applications. And I'll share a little nugget of information that I'm just now implementing. I actually implemented this at my last institution. Um, there's a high correlation to graduation and to persistence with math ability. Doesn't matter, even if the student's going to be an English major, it doesn't matter. Math has a high correlation to success on any of
Mhm.
our campuses. And so in whatever process you're using for reading applications, I always like to drop in a description, two fields, the description of the highest math and then the associated grade. And you may have to come back and update that grade because right now we don't even have seventh semester grades, but
Sure.
ultimately we will. And what that will do is later in the summer, the advisors can go back and look and see, oh, this student struggled with algebra 2, or this student took pre-cal and got an A. And that'll tell a very different story to the advising team than just seeing a GPA, an aggregate GPA of 3.6. That doesn't help them. There's some thought that we might want to include things like what was the highest level of second language.
Mhm.
Did they take 2 years of Spanish? Did they take 5 years of French and what the associated grade? But really, the math has a high correlation, and that's been any institution where I've worked. And you have to hold that in balance with how much time that's going to take, time and training for your admission staff to put that in.
Yep.
So if you're limited on time and resources, try to at least get in the highest math course description and the associated grade.
Mhm. I think that actually it aligns perfectly with the data we're seeing out of high school graduations during the pandemic. We know that especially math and particularly English is probably the two hardest hits in terms of preparedness and readiness for college. So even if you don't have that data readily available, I think that if you really can focus, like you said, on those and even maybe foreign languages, if you have to have a stepping point until you're able to gather that data specifically for you in your institution, I think those are great stepping points to be able to say, let's, we want to make an action. We want to see what we can do to support today. I think those are both excellent options in terms of pulling that data in and preparing those students for success on your campus.
Especially in a test optional environment. I mean, it's just really helpful. And honestly, the coursework is better information about students' future
Mhm.
ability than a test anyway. But it's still the understanding that this is their math ability, this is their language ability.
Sure. Sure. No, I couldn't agree more. So in terms of KPIs, we talk about retention and even really the funnel, right? Like the funnel, I had specific, marks that I was trying to hit, and success really dependent on those KPIs. Is there kind of an industry standard in terms of KPIs through the funnel or through retention?
So key performance indicators. Now, are you talking about in terms of retention and who we should admit? Yes. I've worked with a number of vendors that, especially financial aid vendors that have ratings on high schools. This can help inform um, who we're admitting. But I think what's important to know is that when we have some of this information, this isn't information that we use to limit access to our institution. We don't use this information to deny a student. We use
Sure.
it to help inform the advising process and know that not all schools are the same, and that there are underperforming schools, and a student might need to know might not understand how to study. They might be first generation, and so things like that, making sure that we're flagging. We have an institutional campus wide understanding of what first generation means. We
Mhm.
get to define that any way we want.
Sure.
And there's some gray area, but there's some basics. And that'll help us understand, hey, here's a first generation student. They might need some extra help.
Mhm.
And even things like, how we do the onboarding process in the summer, how we talk to parents during summer orientation, making sure that those parents that didn't go to college, when they get that first call from their son or daughter, that they know to say, have you talked to your advisor yet?
Mhm.
Rather than, oh, I'm coming to get you now.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Yep.
Sometimes parents just need that help, and so the whole process of onboarding, what we're doing during summer orientation, um, make we gotta make sure that we're messaging to parents and understanding, again, the parents' experience with what we're doing and how we're doing it.
I agree, and I think that we can even open that up to, parents and families. We are seeing
Oh,
so
absolutely.
many multi-generational families, or, the, grandparents, or even an aunt or an uncle stepping in and being a part of the student's family, and culturally, more families are influencing that decision and going into it. And so I think it's even bigger, which kind of stresses me out a little bit that we have to address like parents, but now we have to bring in entire families, right? To be able to make these decisions and help support your students better.
I'm really glad you pointed that out, Josh, because I use the term parent uh, too loosely. It's guardians,
Hmm.
extended family, and we see this even when students are visiting our campus. They don't just bring their guardians; they're bringing their younger siblings, their cousins. They're bringing the whole family and welcome them to campus.
Absolutely.
Again, it's making sure that the whole family understand the process, and that's going to be especially important with our first generation students.
I agree. I think that I've seen campuses that will limit, and I understand why, right? Like we know that there's capacity issues, there's challenges. We don't want to spend too much on the food cost for lunch and so forth. But I think in particular, we miss a little bit of the ball here when we limit those opportunities. Because what a way to be impactful for a first generation to bring a younger sibling or to bring a family member who may not think that college is readily accessible or that this is the first person in their family that is making this happen. What an impact that is, right?
Well, okay, so that you just brought up a great point. So this is a phenomenon that we all see. If a student's bringing 5 family members to open house, and again, we
Mhm.
welcome that. But on the flip side of that, food costs have skyrocketed,
Yeah,
and it's always disheartening when we have way more food or we spend way more on food than we'd like to. So, look, this is just an opportunity to call our students
uh-huh.
for the visit program. Hey, Susan, we're so excited about you coming to campus. We noticed that you're bringing a couple of family members. That's great. We want all of them to come. Please let us know if that number changes so that we can adjust our menus.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point too. And I will ask because obviously we our listeners range in institutional sizes. And so when I was at my last institution, we were fairly small, so getting through a couple hundred calls could be fairly easy. But you've been at a array of institutions from the smaller, medium to larger institutions. And you even made a point in your presentation to get to know your students, which I think is vital. How do you do that when you're enrolling a class of 10,000?
Well, it's tough. When you get to those kind of numbers, it's tough. And you have to look for where you can get to know them. When I was at Miami University in Ohio, we're enrolling a pretty large class, not 10,000, but pretty large classes. And you just do what you can around the edges. And sometimes that happens organically. There's a student, you go run through your list of visitors, and there's a student either you've seen multiple times, and so you want to touch base. Hey, glad you're coming back. This will be the third time I'll see you. Can't wait to see you again. Or, hey, I noticed you've never been to campus before. We're really glad you've taken time out. So it's where you can make contacts and in what context you can make those contacts. You can extend that through your student phone-a-thon or your student contact process, whatever that looks like.
Or
Um, it's hard to be personal with everyone in a large group, but you can be personable,
Mhm.
certainly, especially with some of these CRM tools. I really love Slate Video and Slate Voice. We use it
Sure.
sparingly, but it's a great tool.
It is, and I think it's important again that you bring up the CRM and Slate. And I don't want to give away too many of my secrets here. But allowing the system to work in the way that it's intended, right? Especially when you're at a large institution. My alma mater, it's down here in the southeast. And culturally, the South, everybody knows everybody, right? And I naturally, or I was born in California, so I'm a West Coaster. So that was something a little unique to me in terms of the South. But it amazed me that students would walk up to me and be like, "Oh, my cousin goes there. Do you know so and so?" And I'm like, no, our campus has 7,000 students. I'm like, of course I don't. But when you get those opportunities to notate that in the student's record, right? To make notes when you do talk with students, because we're all human. We're not going to remember everything. Even the most charismatic person is not going to be able to remember everything about everything. And so taking great notes in a student record so that way you can reference it next time you do come across it to be able to say, "Hey, it's so good seeing you again," and bring up something from that initial conversation. Again, it's not that time consuming, but in terms of the relationship that you have with that student, it is so impactful. We all want to be remembered. We all want to think that we've made an impact in terms of a conversation. And what a great way to be able to kind of reference that.
Slate Mobile.
Yep. That's the truth. That is the truth. And again, there's ways to do it, even, if your team is as large as you possibly can have it or a very slim and limited team. Again, like you said, it's making those impacts where you have the capabilities of doing it, right? Some students are not going to necessarily need the hand holding. They're not always going to want to talk to their admissions counselor and be their best friend. But we have those students that are. And so I think recognizing that and addressing it when those opportunities come is great advice.
So here's one of the things that I mentioned in my presentation at that conference is the importance of campus employment.
Mhm.
This is sometimes an underutilized or sometimes neglected tool that we have for retention. And I can't speak enough about the virtue of this. So, when I was in graduate school and I was more immersed in the student affairs literature, you could stack up you know, articles, 3 feet, 4 feet high on the importance of student work programs on your campus and the retention value of a job on campus. This is a critical thing to look at, and it's one that we should all be stampeding toward
Mhm.
to improve retention on our campus. And here's some of the secrets. Here's some of the key elements of jobs on campus. Is it's one of those things that it helps in multiple cases. So on the admission side, when families come to negotiate with us on aid, we can always add student employment. And
Sure.
one of those things where everybody wants free money, um, but it's an American cultural value to value work.
Sure.
And I say to a parent, oh, and we can get your son or daughter a job on campus and they can earn $3,000 during the school year. Virtually no one argues against that.
Yep.
And it's an American cultural value. And it's a way to talk to the students about their contribution
Mhm.
to the process. And I always say to parents, and of course, you'll want your son to have some skin in the game, right? And when you do that, they usually stop. Now, occasionally they'll say, well, Jimmy's going to be on sports and it's going to be so hard. And
Mhm.
you can sort of turn it around and say, well, yes, you're right. And one of the advantages to having a job on campus is they'll have a supervisor that cares about them.
Sure.
So I can tell you in my office, in the enrollment office, we have student callers working for us every day. And if they come to us and tell us, hey, I've got a test to study for, we say, great, we'll reschedule the hours next week.
Sure.
Make study hard for your test. Off you go. So here's the other thing about a student work program. And there are great models for this. We can go out and find examples from other colleges across the country that do this extremely well. One of them is St. Ben's and St. John's in Minnesota. They have an excellent student work program, and you can just go and look at all of their forms, their procedures. It's right online. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Another great upper Midwestern college that has a great student work program is Luther College.
Mhm.
Here's what's important about these programs. They start during summer orientation, and it's all about connecting with career services, right? We all know, and we all tell students the importance of connecting with people on campus. Well, one of those connection points is the career services office. They let the
Absolutely.
students go through the process of learning how to develop a resume, to do interviews. And that's what happens at places like St. Ben's and St. John's when they do that onboarding process in the career services. They have to do interviews.
Mhm.
There's the real threat of being fired if they don't perform.
Mhm.
And here's ultimately what the research on student work programs tells us. It's about a connection, having a connection with an adult on campus that cares about them.
Mhm.
What the research tells us is it doesn't matter if it's a professor, although that's great,
Mhm.
but it can be a custodial person.
Yep.
Matters is that it's an adult on campus that cares about that student. That's why the retention value of students who work on campus is so much higher. The
Sure.
graduation rates nationally are higher. And so it's something that we should all be looking at very carefully. And the great thing is it's not that hard to do this.
Mhm.
Again, places like Luther College have developmentally calibrated jobs, meaning in their first year, maybe a student's doing a lower level piece of work on campus, and then ultimately they grow in responsibility.
Sure. It's such a great opportunity. A lot of times we want to put students and it's an obvious fit, right? Like we need to get them in their major as soon as possible to try to get that engagement with the faculty. And doing so in work study or working on campus, I think also is a great opportunity because, like you'd mentioned, it's a great career path, but then it also can be another opportunity for a student to say, wait a minute, I thought this is what I want to do.
Mhm.
Maybe this isn't what I want to do. Or very similarly, it can spark a, a idea of, I never thought this would be something. I mean, it's kind of similarly years ago again in admissions. Admission wasn't necessarily a degree or a career path, right? But being heavily involved, I thought, customer service has always been in my back pocket. I've always done it. Maybe this could be a good fit. Maybe this can work out. So I think very similarly, in addition to the academic program, again, getting them into work study or a job on campus is such a great opportunity to, again, really engage. And I couldn't agree more. If they have a connection, it is harder to break up with a university than it is without that connection, right? Whether that be a student, whether that be a adult on campus. Again, we see that we are naturally we enjoy the company of others and we look for that support, and having it on campus I think is critical. But can we talk a little bit about, because I haven't heard this before, and I think it makes all the sense in the world, but again, I have not heard that anybody's doing it, is putting the job or campus employment up at orientation. I think that is brilliant because it is such a critical piece. And we would do something very similar in terms of, we'll have you work on campus. Again, it'll get you this set of money that you can pay either, for fun on campus or going directly to your tuition, but actually moving that up instead of being the first week of classes or being a part of your first year experience, moving that up to orientation does a lot of things that, again, it only makes sense. So why isn't it being done more often?
Because it's a lot of hard work and it's hard to get your colleagues to do it. But I mean, think about it just from the enrollment perspective, just the admission people listening to this. I mean, we want to get our student phone callers, our student tour guides. We want to get that stuff up and running as soon as possible, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
the sooner we can do that, the better. And then what will happen is if we can share that with our colleagues in the business office, athletics, the library, they want to get students up and running quickly too, right? And
Mm,
again, what's important is that connection. We want the students to be thinking about something they're looking forward to on campus in August. Oh, yeah. And when I get there, I've got this job in the library, or
yep.
when I get there, I've got this job in the athletics department, or wherever, or fill in the blank. It's just another way we can get them to connect, as you point out, with people on campus. And that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely, definitely. And I'll kind of put a little media cross plug in here as well too. We've been having these free social media consultations where we're talking with schools and we're evaluating, and we're talking about, different social media platforms. And something that is coming through almost in every conversation that we have is we don't have the time or the effort to be able to create content. And I will be honest, creating content for TikTok terrifies me, right? Like, or really any social media. I do social media poorly for myself. How am I going to put together a strategy for it? Um, Here is an opportunity to, at orientation or even beforehand, to be able to identify students, even if they have an interest, right? That you could be the face of the institution that you're going to be enrolling at, right? And you can have a job at orientation creating content for their social media, being that forward face for them. What excitement and point of pride for the student. Again, just it has all the benefits, but then we talk about student melt and retention, and it only validates and betters the opportunity for that student to be successful on your campus.
Marketing experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 100%.
There's just like no reason to start this right away. And again, once our colleagues start seeing what it can do for us, they'll want to join in too. Again, making sure that our colleagues understand that they have access to these
Mhm.
programs. And they do, they're all hiring students, but maybe they're not thinking about it in the same way. They're not thinking about it in terms of a retention strategy.
Sure.
Occasionally, you'll find a school that's still thinking about it in the sort of way we used to 30 years ago, where a student, like, we just sit them in the corner and we pay them. No, it has to be real work.
Yep.
That's what's important,
Sure.
because that's what fosters the connection with the supervisor,
Mhm.
is doing real work. Um,
Absolutely.
I know St. Ben's and St. John's is really good about um, having the student write like a response at the end of the term about their experience working with that person again. And that's one of the things that's critical in this process, is making sure that the student engages with that supervisor and it's true work.
Absolutely. And I think looking at it from multiple perspectives, right? Because immediately, I maybe wouldn't have thought about having them write that statement, but then is there a possibility that you can then share that statement? That if it's within a positive environment, of course, with permission. But is there little nuggets that maybe these students are going to say, I had a great first year experience because I connected with so and so, or I wouldn't still be here if it wasn't for this job opportunity, and then immediately turning that into statements that you can put across. Even flyers going across campus or little tidbits of information of really gathering that and then putting it back in front to say, no, no, when we say that we're going to do this, we're going to do it. And here's the results of it, right? Here's why it matters to you because it matters to our students.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Well, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't get to that you think that it's important that we discuss?
Oh, so many things. There's so many things. Even things like let's make sure that all departments get involved, right? And so there's a key role in all this for like the alumni office, like especially the alumni office, because we want students to identify as being members of the alumni as soon as they walk through the door, right? And we want to start building, you know, a a habit of philanthropy, or at least
Sure.
an understanding of philanthropy when they're a current student. And so there are a couple of great programs out there where Purdue does a great job of this. If you go to the Purdue website, you can find alumni mentor programs
Hmm.
where it just connects alumni with current students, and it can be a simple process of having a conversation about that job, but it does multiple things, right? On one hand, it helps the student identify with, oh, I'm here for a reason. I want to get to this, go to this school so I can get this job. Here's someone that can help me understand that job.
Yep.
In some cases, provide internships. And then the development office wants to get involved, right? Because they want to start cultivating and developing that engagement
Hmm.
even before the student graduates.
Sure. Sure.
And it's also a way for the alumni office. Our alumni colleagues usually get on board because you can help them understand that, hey, this is a way to cultivate alumni gifts.
Hmm.
Because we're going to first bring them on as an alumni mentor, and guess what? That's going to turn into a giving habit
Hmm.
because they're going to see these bright young students, and they're going to start thinking, oh wow, look at all these good things that are going on in my alma mater. So it becomes a win-win for everyone. Win-win for the student, win-win for the alumni office, and of course the institution. So they're just a myriad ways to think about all the ways we can get our colleagues across campus involved in this process.
Sure. And I think that, again, that really resonates, especially with this new generation. I've seen data come across that, and we know from the conversations in terms of student debt and so forth, that, they really value time, sometimes even more than money in terms of the ability to give. Right. And so we're seeing, I think, and some alumni offices struggle with it is that they may not be able to, or maybe they don't want to even at this point. They haven't had that relationship of fostering to encourage philanthropy. But being able to say, I'm not calling to ask for money. I'm calling to ask of your time. I'm calling to ask you to mentor, students. What would have it meant to you to have been a student and to have a mentor that could provide internships, even job guidance or how to navigate a office environment, just having that context to support you as you're kind of going through your college journey, but then also afterwards. Because it's been, drained into my head. It's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know. And so here's yet another person in your pocket that you can turn to get that support. That just, again, it aligns right now so well with what this generation is thinking.
Exactly. Well, Josh, I think we've only like scratched the surface, and we didn't get into anything like, summer advising, or, more information about surveys or course scheduling, or how we deal with that data in our student information system and how we use it to leverage retention. But that just means you need to invite me back for another one.
Listen, we're always open for a part two. It's we find that these conversations, there's so much to dive into that it's just impossible to cover in, a 20-30 minute podcast. But it's just I think it's so critical. But having said that, you make a great point because I think that we have talked about a lot today, and there's a lot for folks that are maybe considering How do I manage that? How do I, if I want to implement some of this stuff, but there's a lot that we need to do to be able to get us here. What is your recommendation and what is that first step to be able to provide this better experience for students that's really going to support, the in overall retention?
The first step is just making sure there's a true campus wide committee
Mhm.
and knowing that, hey, you can never know it all. You just have to have, sit down with colleagues and, develop plans, listen to what they have to say, avail yourselves to their wisdom,
Sure.
start making plans to, choose one thing. Say, okay, let's try to improve our first year to second year retention rate by 1 percentage point. How are we going to do it? What could we do? And just start that way. These are things that we can all do. Even a 1% increase would be a heavy lift, but it's
Sure.
not possible.
Sure.
And as long as there's a good, healthy sort of forum for that to exist, it should be great, a great project for your campus.
Absolutely. I had a mentor that once said, how do you eat a big pink elephant? One bite at a time. And I think that that's so important because I think sometimes that we get inundated with the data, or we get inundated with everything that's on our plate and everything that has to happen, which kind of puts us in this action of inaction. Is that we're too overwhelmed for too much on our plate that we just don't have time and therefore we do nothing. I think taking one action, saying, we're gonna be realistic in our goal. And I'm always a fan of a stretch goal, but let's have a reality goal here too. We want to raise it 1%. What can we do today moving forward to get that needle to move? I think that's great advice.
Terrific. This has been fun, Josh.
Bill, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And again, Mike, it's been a pleasure having you. We really do appreciate it. And definitely look out for invitation part two.
Okay, terrific.